Greetings. My name is Justin Jones-Fosu. Most people call me sexy. I'm joking. They don't accept my two kids when I pay them. But I define happiness as actually meaningfulness. And the reason I say that is many years ago, and I love happiness. I even love the song, Don't Worry, Cuckoo. All right. I love the song. But I realized that there are certain things, semantics, that didn't make me happy, but that were meaningful. Like I didn't wake up early in the morning when my kids were in the other room at 3 in the morning and crying. I didn't walk into the room like I'm happy because I get to change their diaper. I didn't do that. But I knew it was meaningful because one, I didn't want CPS calling, but two, because I wanted to create a safe environment for my kids. And so, how I define happiness is actually meaningfulness. There's certain things in my life and in our lives that may not bring a smile, that may not bring a great sense of excitement, but it's worth it because we realize the power of what we're doing. That's how I define happiness.
That is beautiful, brother. I love that. I love that. Lots of meaning. And we're going to share a lot of meaning today, man. So first, congrats on your new book coming out any day now, right? The How to Disagree More
Yes.
Respectfully.
Ooh,
Oh, you got
I
them.
upside down.
There you go.
I got that. Yeah. I
Beautiful.
respectfully disagree. How to have
Yeah.
difficult conversations in a divided world.
Cool. Cool, cool. So, what is the difference between a respectful disagreement and a disrespectful disagreement?
I love that you asked that question. And it's actually a little bit more nuanced than I initially thought. So, in our research, we initially set out to help people to go from disrespectful disagreement, which is the stuff we normally see, the name calling, the I think you're stupid, I think you're, where did you get that idea from? Like all of those things. And we want to help people get to respectful disagreement. And that was around, wow, I've never heard that perspective before, or thank you for sharing your view. But it was things that still valued the humanity of people, right? And so one of the things that we've often shared is that I can vehemently disagree with your ideology and yet still passionately pursue your humanity. And so people will come up after presentations and workshops, it's like, oh, I love that, but how do I do that? Right?
Yeah.
Or there's like, it's difficult. How do you handle this specific situation? And so we went after how to help the everyday practical person, workplace people, people in your families, communities, all that stuff, to be able to move to that place where they're still honoring the humanity of people, even when they can dishonor their ideology. Now, what we didn't realize is that there's a whole nother category, Phil. There's a whole category that we found in the research that we now call disrespectful agreement. And that's
Ooh.
where you might be on two different sides of the fence. You might be um, gaslighting someone, as the new generation calls it, where you could be like, Justin, I think that's a great idea. But then somebody talks to you behind the closed doors like, Phil, Justin's idea was crazy. I don't know what he was thinking about. So there's disrespectful agreement because you're agreeing in the moment, but you're actually disrespecting the other person because you really don't agree. Or the other side of that fence is a person who hasn't learned to utilize their voice yet. They were told maybe growing up to only be seen but not heard. They may have been in underrepresented groups, other things where they haven't had a sense of power. There can be power differentials and all those things that may exist, but they disrespectfully agree just to get along, to quote unquote keep the peace. And they never share their true disagreement in the midst of it. And so those are the two categories that we realize in our little matrix that we want to help people to move from disrespectful agreement to respectful disagreement, as well as disrespectful disagreement to respectful agreement.
Wow. Wow, that's so interesting. I mean, yeah, to your point, I thought it was either we agree or we disagree. And maybe you're a jerko like me, and maybe you're a nice guy like you, and there's a part in the middle there, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so with that, I mean, so was that research, or did you experience some of that, or how's that come apart? Because you mentioned the research, but I'm curious.
Yeah. So some of it was research, but some of it was actually friction. And so even with our publisher, I submitted this thing, and we were initially going after this, and we had a person on the editorial team for our publisher that was like, I actually disagree with this book. And I had to practice the principles, right, of respectful disagreement. And so instead of like, how dare she, and I can't believe it, and I was like, well, hey, would you be willing to get on the phone? And so we got on a phone call, and I was like, I'd love just to hear your perspective, your story. I'd love to hear where you came from. And she shared a powerful story with me, is that for a large part of her early career, she found that she was just keeping the peace, and that in the midst she was disrespecting herself. And it took her a while to find her voice where she could speak up about things that were challenging or that she disagreed with or other things. And as I listened, as I heard, as I valued her humanity and engaged, it opened my eyes to see the conversation in a whole different way. And so that's part of what we call our qualitative research, where we're able to have the conversation, hear the story, and actually create a model based upon those conversations. So yeah.
So the person who goes along to get along is disrespecting themselves, not the other person.
Correct. Well, they actually could be doing both. The main person they're disrespecting is themselves, but there are some people who actually want to hear the truth, right? Not everybody is the person. There's a lot of people who don't want to hear the truth, but there's some people who want to hear that. You know, one of the things I tell my team often is like, "Oh, friction makes us better," and I often encourage people to tell me how this won't work. Tell me why my idea may not last, or other things. And so there are people who genuinely want to hear your true and honest perspective. Now, if you trust them or you trust the system enough to be able to share that, is a different story. So the main person that they are disrespecting is themselves, but they could also be disrespecting the person asking, or the team member or leader that they're engaging.
Wow, that's so interesting. So with that, one of the people that you disagree with in your book is Aretha Franklin. Yeah. Come on now. How can you disagree with Aretha? What's going on? Did she spell
really
respect wrong? I mean, what? Come on.
No, I mean, she spelled it very well. R-E-S-P-E-C-T. Find out what it means. Right. She spelled it so well. But one of the things, and it was really just it started off as a joke as I was talking to somebody about it. And I actually was like, no, that's actually pretty powerful. You know, because if you remember the lyrics of the song, she says, just a little bit, respect, just a little bit, right? And I was like, in our society, in our times, in our global world today, at the global world is together, okay, we don't need a little bit of respect. We need a whole lot of it. And that's the part where I disrespectfully disagreed. It's not about a little bit of respect right now. It's about a whole lot of it. And helping people to move into that place of true and genuine, what we call golden respect, is super powerful. So that's why I respectfully disagree with Aretha Franklin.
All right. It was pretty respectful. I'm gonna agree with that. So that's good. So
you don't have to, by the way.
No, I know, right? So well, that's the part of the book, right? I'm not gaslighting you here. I'm respectfully agreeing. So no, that's fun. That's fun. So with that, you say another thing that's an interesting line, and that is how you see is what you get. Not what, but how. So talk to me about that, because I saw that. I'm like, what is he talking about here? Yeah. And then I read the chapter. I'm like, oh, that's really good. So enlighten us, please.
Yeah. So often the frame or the popular statement is, what you see is what you get. And for me, it's not about what you see, it's how you see. And what I mean by how you see, it's how you engage the person, how you think of the person, right? So I'm going to give you an interesting study. I don't even know if I put this in the book, but it just came to mind. The 1968 study by Rosenthal and Jacobson. And what they did is that they studied a group of teachers. And what they did with these group of teachers, they gave them a list of the most gifted students in their classroom, right? And at the end of the year, and it sounds like you know the study, at the end of the year, the students who were on the list as the most gifted students, they performed the best. Why? Well, they actually created the list at random. They had no idea who were the most gifted students or not. But what they did is that when the teachers thought that they were the most gifted students, what ended up happening is that they looked at themselves and said, how do I change my approach? How do I engage them in a unique and different way to be able to help cultivate what's already been proven about them, that they're the most gifted? And then two, they looked at the students, and when they didn't measure up to the standard, they would encourage them and say, you're better than this. Like you're on the gifted list. But the students who weren't on the gifted list, instead of charging it to their effort, they subconsciously or sometimes consciously charged it to their ability. So how we see people is so powerful. If I see this person as a family member that I like, or a person that I value, how I listen and engage them in difference is going to be vastly different than somebody that I see I don't think is worthy. I think their ideas are way out there, and I don't see them as connected to me at all. And so that's why I run around, and one of the things I do, I call everybody fam. right? You meet here, we call brother or sis, brother, fam. What's up, fam? I don't care what you wear, what's in your yard, all that kind of stuff, because I want and challenge myself to how I see them as a worthy family member that's deserving of value and dignity. And that's why how you see is more important than what you see.
Well, speaking of how though, how do you do that, man? Because that's a big shift, brother. That's
Yeah.
a big shift. Because right, I'd like to say that I see people as they are,
Yeah.
but that isn't always enough.
And we don't know how they are until we actually have meaningful conversation with them, until we actually have genuine dialogue, that we truly listen and hear behind the words. And I'd say there's three things that have helped me in my journey of seeing people differently. Number one, it's my mommy. Like, I get it from my mom. I get it from right. It's my mom, who I affectionately call mommy. It's dash E, not the MMMY. Is when I was growing up, one of the things that she did is she took us, my brother and I, as a single mom, really challenging moments and times. She took us to not only events that we didn't know a lot about, but Phil, she took us to events we disagreed with. And I remember just sitting in those events like, why are we here? We don't even agree with this, right? But what my mom was challenging us to do was to embrace and engage the humanity of people, even in those early ages. And I didn't understand the seed she was planting then, but I learned through my mom. She was one of the first Black female air traffic controllers in the Air Force, and she had been through a lot and learned a lot. And what I learned from her is that she was trying to make sure my brother and I were positioned differently. So that's number one. Number two, I have a really good therapist. And I believe in therapy. Please go get therapy. Therapy is not just because something's going wrong, it's to keep things going right. And so for me, my therapist has helped me in reframing and doing the things that psychologists call mental reframing and all these pieces to be able to engage people in better ways. And last but not least, and I'm saying this is not easy at all, is I look in the mirror. And when I look in the mirror, I ask myself questions like, where might I be off on things where people look at me with a side eye? Or they may think that, this guy is like, what is he talking about? Like, of course that's not, because I may be ignorant, which I don't, for me, ignorance is not a bad word. I know we've used it as a bad word. Ignorance means I just don't know it yet. Um, or I'm uninformed or other things. And so when I look at myself in the mirror, it gives me a deeper sense of empathy to engage people. And that's why I love the book. Oprah, and I forgot the doctor who wrote it. It's called What Happened to You? And it shifts the question. We often talk about people and say, what's wrong with you? But as I dove into the research of this, they talk about how trauma has informed us and led us to many different things. And as you see people and their stories and you engage them, it's not what's wrong with them. It's really what happened to them. And I just want to understand people's story and how they got there. And so when I've leaned into hearing people's stories, no matter what their ideology is, it's helped me to better engage them and with a sense of dignity and value.
Wow. Wow. Looking in the mirror and asking the hard questions is probably the hardest one there. I mean, having a parent who loves you, good.
Yeah.
I can hire a therapist. But the
Yeah.
hard work, man, is looking in the mirror and asking the hard questions. So how do you cultivate that self-awareness to know that you aren't always right, that there are things you don't know?
Yeah, it actually falls right into our first pillar, which is challenge your perspective. That's one of the things that my mom did for us growing up. As I shared, we went to events that we didn't know a lot about. And one of the things that we started understanding about respectful disagreement, we initially had four pillars of bridging the divide. And then we realized as we dug deeper, it was actually five pillars. It could be 20 or 30 or 99, right? But these five pillars that rose up to the top. And it was actually the last pillar that became the first. So the last pillar we found was actually the first pillar, and that's challenge your perspective. And why is that important? Because respectful disagreements happen before disagreements even happen. And what I mean by that is, are we constantly putting ourselves in positions of learning, of understanding things that are different? Are we engaging in things we don't know? I love Carol Dweck's research on growth versus fixed mindset. And I realized at times I was operating a lot in a fixed mindset where I didn't want to be challenged, but I don't want my perceived intelligence to be challenged. I want to be better compared to everybody else, versus growth mindset where failure was just another data point for learning, where ignorance meant I don't know it yet, like all of these things. And so I said, well, what would it look like for me to put myself in positions of learning constantly? So what I created was, at that time, we called it the 6 months challenge that became the Circles of Grace challenge. And it was simply this, that I challenged myself every 6 months to go to events, experiences, engage with people I didn't know a lot about and or that I disagreed with. And so I would go not trying to prove my point or my perspective, but just to go and listen and to learn. And as I began to challenge my perspective, it opened up doors. So now that as I'm in these disagreements, I'm now able to more clearly hear the stories or understand, or like I'm seeing the blind spots. Or let's just take it out of the whole business of disagreement. Let's just take in the stuff that we don't know, right? Like I didn't know how to ski until my 30s. Right? We grew up poor, we're unhoused, and for stints of time, we didn't have a lot of money, so skiing cost money. And so, like, I didn't know what to do when I went to this little place called Vail. And so I'm there and I'm skiing and I'm struggling through this stuff. And these little kids who are 4 or 5 who are just whoosh, whoosh, right, and just killing the game. And I feel stupid at this time. I feel ignorant. I feel like I should have known. I feel like, why am I here? Are people looking at me funny? And I realized it was just another moment to learn. And the more and more we learn, the more and more our mindset allows us to continually challenge our perspective. So one practical way is to take your own Circles of Grace challenge and ask, is there an area that you don't know a lot about or you disagree with? And give yourself a timetable to really lean into that. Watch the movies, engage with people, talk to your neighbors, talk to your coworkers, hear their stories. And as you learn, you might find, wow, like either one, there's a lot I didn't know about that. 2, I actually still consistently disagree with it, but it allows me to understand how you got there. So that's why I think challenging our perspective is really, really helpful.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Chris Stone is watching here and he said, excellent mindset. Curiosity is key to growth. And I love that because, Justin, you've got another chapter in the book about cultivating your curiosity. Yeah. So how do we do that and still kind of keep who we are?
Yeah. Oftentimes what we find, and that's actually our third pillar, obviously challenge your perspective, be the student, and it actually sequentially helps us to cultivate our curiosity, right? So if I'm constantly challenging my perspective, I'm hearing stories, I'm learning, when I engage with people in disagreement, I'm the student, and I'm cultivating curiosity. It means that I'm focusing more on, instead of filling in the gaps with conclusions, I'm filling in the gaps with curiosity. Now, what does that mean? One of the things of learning, and I love this, they call it the inverted U. And in an inverted U, there are 2 places where we don't learn effectively or don't learn the most. Number 1, when we think we absolutely know nothing. And number 2, when we feel like we absolutely know everything. And so when I can first say to myself, Justin, there's something to learn here, let me ask more questions. It allows me to cultivate curiosity. That's number 1. Number 2, one of the things we found, and we adopted it from our work on the inclusive mindset, was we don't really listen to each other, right? We're like trying to listen to jump in to show where we disagree, or trying to, and so we created the tool, the power of 3, to challenge myself first to listen to the third level of the conversation, and that's to at least get to that third level where I'm asking a question. Oh, tell me more about that. Or, oh, can you explain this a little bit more? Or because now I'm able to understand how to do that. So when I just do that, the power of 3 has been a really cool tool to cultivate curiosity with people. It's simply when they don't jump in and share their perspective or why they think that person's wrong, or but they ask to hear more. They say, tell me more. It allows you to hear people's stories. Now, to answer your point earlier, we've sometimes conflated the idea of being curious to losing ourselves. There's been some things about people that I know without a shadow of a doubt I completely disagree with, but I want to better understand how they got there. I want to better understand their journey of getting there, right? And I may never talk about my perspective because it may not call for it at that moment. But if I do, I can do it with a sense of clarity and understanding about how they actually arrived to their place. So they're actually having a conversation about the same thing. So cultivating our curiosity can be done, obviously, by listening deeply to others as we hear their stories. But it's also just realizing, there's so much of this world that we just don't know. And when we operate in a growth mindset instead of the fixed mindset, where instead of trying to protect ourselves from people thinking that we don't know everything, opening ourselves up and saying, hey, I don't know a lot. I'm ignorant in a lot of things, and I want to learn. That's freed me to engage with people and hear. And I go in those conversations like, hey, I don't know a lot about this. I'd love for you to help me understand.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's awesome. So much there and so much more we could talk about. But as we wrap up here, Justin, first of all, I want to encourage folks to get a copy of the book. I Respectfully Disagree. You can pre-order it. It's available on Amazon. You can get to know Justin more there through his book and through his work. But Justin, if you were going to tell people, other than buying your book, which is super important, where would they get started along this journey? Like, what's the first thing that they need to do? Maybe the first two things.
Yeah. The first thing is it's self-work. It's internal work. It's sharing with yourself, talking to yourself, engaging with yourself about that there's so much more that I can learn. There's so much more that I just don't know. And maybe share that with your friends. Share that with 5 people. Like, hey, I don't know this. I don't know. Right? And just choose. We came up with a new model today, right? Called the 5 I don't knows. Right? Talk to your friends. Say, I don't know about X. Could you help me learn more about this? Right? And those are one ways that it just starts to cultivate that curiosity in us to learn. And it challenges that inverted U, because now that we know a little bit more, it allows us to dive in deeper. The second thing is I want us to be able to truly do this. And this is the harder part, is to separate ideology from the individual. And this is a hard thing for us, right? It's a hard thing for me, right? Because we often identify how a person thinks, believes, and or behaves as the actual individual. And then we pick and choose. So for people who are really critical of the criminal justice system, they separate the actions of the person from the individual, and they want restorative justice and other things like that. But then in other cases, when somebody says something that they disagree with, they associate the individual and the ideology together, right? And so we kind of pick and choose where we flow with this separation. But what I challenge myself to do is that statement is that I can vehemently disagree with someone's ideology and yet still passionately pursue their humanity. Why is that important? Number one is that we don't know the seeds that we're planting. We could be planting powerful seeds in people. Number two, a small story of that is one of my former colleagues who was a former skinhead, and I was just fascinated to understand his journey, his story. And one of the things he shared with me, he was like, Justin, I used to love when people called me names, bigot and misogynist and all that. He's like, I love that. He was like, it was the very people who that I disrespected and demeaned that still chose to show me respect, that were the catalyst of change, the seeds of change for me. Right. And he's like, they'll never know that, but they were the seed changers. And that was a big thing. And then last but not least, this is so true, is that the third part is that we always have the power to choose to respect someone. Respect does not have to be earned. Respect is your choice. Please check out the book, not my book, but check out the book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Powerful, powerful story of a Holocaust survivor who talks about this difference between stimulus and response, is that even in the most horrific of moments, he still could choose how he engaged and how he responded, even if it was extremely very hard and difficult. I loved hearing his words and reading his words, because it challenged my thoughts of how I could show up. So we have the power to choose to respect.
Beautiful. I love that, man. So much good stuff. Well, first, friends, if you're loving what Justin's got to say, I encourage you to go to workmeaningful.com. Get to know him, get to know his work. It's very powerful. And then definitely get a copy of his book. Get it on pre-order. Go to amazon.com. You'll see the link is up there for you. The book is I Respectfully Disagree. If you read the graphic that I used, for whatever reason, Canva didn't let me put the dash, so it looks like it says, I respectfully disagree with Justin Jones-Fosu. But I don't. I respectfully agree.
You can.
I can't, but I can. That's right. And that's what I learned from the book. Yeah. So there we go, brother. I appreciate you. Thank you, Justin. As always, it's great to see you, man. Good stuff.
You too, brother.
Congrats on a great book.